Now, as you may know, the Siege of Mandalore story arc that we're getting here at the end of Season 7 of the Clone Wars, which is also the final season, is not the first time this particular story has been told within the new canon. The first time was actually in a young adult novel simply titled Ahsoka that came out in October of 2016, and the way events played out there are, well, a little different, though in some respects similar to the way we saw them play out in the show, and in a moment I'll go over what exactly happened in that book. Before I do though, let me just say there's a small chance for spoilers here, that there are things that the final episode in the Siege of Mandalore, which at the time of making this is a couple days away, could still borrow from that book. So if you don't want even a remote chance of anything at all being possibly ruined, it's a good time to click away and maybe come back after that final episode. Okay, so that said, the Ahsoka novel's recounting of the Siege of Mandalore is actually incredibly vague, especially the lead up to it, because there basically is none. Suddenly, at the start of the book, Ahsoka is on Mandalore, and there's smoke and fire all around her thanks to the battle that's raging on. We have no idea why there's actually a battle going on or how it started, and she's about to face off against Maul, though we're told she has some sort of plan. Other than that, the only thing we're really told about how we got here is that the last time Ahsoka saw Anakin, he was giving her her old lightsabers back before rushing off to save the Chancellor. We're also told it was she who sought him out, or the Jedi out, for help, and all these things of course line up pretty well with what we saw in the Clone Wars episodes. The only major departure thus far is that in the book, Ahsoka's sabers are still green, whereas in the series Anakin made them blue to make them better. And before I go on here, let me quickly say that this is not exactly what the book is even about, the Siege of Mandalore I mean. Instead it's mainly about how Ahsoka lays low after Order 66, and eventually ends up as a Fulcrum agent, the first one in fact, for the fledgling Rebel Alliance. It also explains where she gets her white lightsabers from, and there's an encounter with an Inquisitor. All around, it's a pretty good book, I'd say. And where we actually learn about the Siege of Mandalore in it is in a couple of these short flashback interludes that happen throughout the story, only the first two of which, and they're maybe 4 or 5 pages each, actually deal with the Siege of Mandalore and what happened there. Anyway, though the vague setup in the book is still pretty much in line with the show, things take a quick departure as soon as the duel between Maul and Ahsoka begins. In it, we learn that Maul is actually pleased that Anakin didn't show up himself, that he sent her instead, that he doesn't essentially have to break a sweat against such a worthy opponent. Whereas in the show, Maul's whole plan, or at least a big part of it, was to get Anakin to come to Mandalore so that he could kill him, and thus mess with Palpatine's grand plan for Anakin to make him his next apprentice, a role of course Maul himself used to fill. In fact, in the book, no motivation at all is given for Maul. He's just kind of there on Mandalore for Ahsoka to fight, which is fine because the book, again, is not about him or the Siege of Mandalore, it's about Ahsoka. Thus, and this goes without saying, I think, Maul in the show and his motivations given there make that version of the Siege of Mandalore so much better, of course. Yet at the same time, I have seen some wondering if maybe Maul says too much to Ahsoka in the Clone Wars. I mean, Maul flat out tells her that Sidious, or Palpatine, wants Anakin for his next apprentice. Then a couple days after Order 66, Darth Vader, this very powerful Force user, just kind of shows up. Now, I suppose it could be a heck of a coincidence, but all things considered, you'd think maybe Ahsoka might have some suspicions about Vader being Anakin, yet when we see her in Rebels, she only seems to be starting to put all the pieces together. Now, it doesn't bug me too much. If anything, it shows just how much faith Ahsoka has in Anakin, that she doesn't really or can't seem to entertain this idea that he could be Vader until many, many years later, when the evidence is so overwhelming, when she literally senses him in that episode of Rebels, where he also senses her, and even after that, she still seems to have her doubts about him being Vader. Anyway, back to the duel with Maul in the book. There's a bit of banter between the two, all of which is different from what we see in the show. He's not asking her to join him and be his apprentice or anything like that. If anything, he treats her like an easy or unworthy opponent and tries to mentally unbalance her before the fight begins. And when it does, the overconfident Maul is kind of baited into a trap by Ahsoka sort of feigning being caught off guard by him, and he ultimately gets captured in ray shields. And that wraps up the first of the two interludes regarding the Siege of Mandalore in this book. So basically, the end result in the book is, you could say, the same as the one in the show. Maul ends up fighting Ahsoka and gets captured. We just took a much different and far less cool looking path to get there. The second interlude then, and this is where we really risk treading into potential spoiler territory, opens with Ahsoka looking at a grave, and after a bit, we learn that the grave says it belongs to Rex, though it's actually a different clone in his armor, even though he still seemed to have most of it in the show Rebels. The grave also apparently says something to the effect that he died while killing Ahsoka, and to sell this little ruse, Ahsoka leaves behind both of her lightsabers for the Empire to eventually find. Furthermore, we learn Ahsoka had a choice once Order 66 went down, that she could either kill Maul or save Rex, and she chose, of course, to save Rex. How exactly that all played out is not even hinted at. We don't know how she saved Rex, if maybe, in this book version, he somehow fought the compulsion caused by the chip to carry out Order 66, and was maybe about to be gunned down by his brothers for disobeying, and Ahsoka went to save him instead of going after Maul. Something like that is the only thing I can guess at, really. What we do know according to the book is that Ahsoka seemed to question that decision a bit after the fact, to save Rex over killing Maul, I mean, knowing she let a monster loose on the galaxy, a galaxy suddenly devoid of Jedi to stop him, and I do find it interesting she made the exact same choice as Anakin. She chose to try and save someone she cared about over killing a Sith, or former Sith in Maul's case, and someone who is obviously a great threat to the galaxy. And I think we can safely assume, as the leader of Crimson Dawn, Maul did indeed bring quite a bit of misery to the galaxy. Either way here, in a sense, what the book told us is true from a certain point of view, because Ahsoka could have killed Maul in the show or let him be executed by the clones, but she used him as a distraction to save Rex. Just like in the book, she picked saving Rex over stopping or killing Maul. Again, the end result of both show and book is basically the same. The road taken to get there is what's different. That then leaves the question, will the last episode of Clone Wars show Ahsoka at a supposed grave of Rex, leaving her lightsabers behind to help sell the fact that both are dead? Or will it show something similar that could be construed to stay in line with what the book showed us? This one I don't know about, because in the last episode here of Clone Wars, plenty of clones saw Rex gunning down some of his brothers to save Ahsoka, so I don't know how they'd sell that he changed his mind or whatever and ultimately killed Ahsoka. Though I do suppose this final episode could still end with Ahsoka at a supposed grave of Rex, somehow or for some reason leaving her lightsabers behind to try and sell the fact that they're both dead. I don't know how we'd get to that point, but who knows. Though I'm certainly not going to be upset if it doesn't end that way. Because though I did enjoy the Ahsoka novel, again, it's pretty good and worth a read, I'm okay with it essentially being retconned, or part of it being retconned. Because really the only thing being blatantly changed are 2 of the half dozen or so interludes that are in this book, and again, we kind of can construe them to be still true, or the end results to be accurate for the most part. The rest of the book, as far as I can remember, it's been almost 4 years since I read it, can more or less be left intact, as it takes place in the years after the Siege of Mandalore, and doesn't reference it or specific events from it, at least. And quite frankly here, I don't think all too many people are going to be upset about these changes. If you read the book, there's a good chance you're a fan of Ahsoka, which means you likely very much appreciate the expansion of her story taking place here in the final season of the Clone Wars. Getting it is certainly worth a slight retcon made to a small part of a book. And the thing is, when that book was written several years back now, no one likely knew they were ever going to be able to finish the Clone Wars. Dave Filoni has said one of the goals behind that book, which he did give plenty of input on, was to see if Ahsoka could make the jump to another medium, if people would care enough about the character to read a book about her. And who knows, maybe the popularity of that book, the response to it, in some small way helped get the final season of the Clone Wars greenlit, and the response to this final season will likely mean seeing a lot more Ahsoka in the future. So in closing here, though I and many others according to the poll I did a while back now, think continuity across the canon is extremely important, that contradictions within it are one of the quickest ways to break immersion or to destroy the illusion of this being an actual history of a galaxy far, far away, which of course I know it isn't, but it's fun to play pretend. This is one of those times when I certainly can understand why it was done, why something loosely established in one place was changed when it was fully fleshed out in another. And if you're someone who likes to rectify things like this in your head, who wants everything to make sense, I think the easiest way to look at this is kind of what I've been saying. The events described in the Ahsoka novel are still more or less correct. Maul and Ahsoka fought, he was captured, but thanks to Order 66 he got away, though Ahsoka could have stopped him, but she chose to save Rex instead. The part with the grave thing, well, we'll have to wait and see with the final episode. Another way to look at it here is that this final arc of the Clone Wars, the Siege of Mandalore, has been some of the best Star Wars we've ever gotten, and it's more than worth a small change to a book. And though I thought it was fun to make a video comparing the two, I am certainly not complaining about any changes here, and I don't think anyone else will either. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to give me your take. Does the changes made from the Ahsoka novel bug you? Do you not care at all? Or do you see it as simply worth it to get this final story from the Clone Wars? Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.